Hello, good evening, and welcome to the premiere of Munich 1919. I'm Stephanie Fried, AVP of Marketing at the Bushnell.
And I'm Jennifer LaRue, the Director of Public Programs at the Mark Twain House and Museum. Thank you so much for joining us tonight as we premiere the staged reading of the winner of our Page to Stage short story writing contest.
So the contest was held earlier this year, and we had about 140 writers submit their short stories, which was incredible.
Right?
Top 3 won cash prizes, and the winning story, which we're going to talk about tonight, was adapted into a staged reading. Due to COVID-19, though, we opted to record the reading and stream it to everyone here tonight.
Tonight, we're proud to welcome the winner of the contest with his short story, Munich 1919. Welcome, Rand Richards Cooper.
Welcome, Rand.
Hi,
Thank
Rand.
you.
It's great to see you. I know you and Jennifer go way, way back. And I've only just recently gotten to know you, but it's been terrific, and I'm so glad you're here tonight. And congratulations on winning the inaugural Page to Stage contest.
Thank you. It's been great, and I apologize for whatever is happening visually. So it's going to be a somewhat psychedelic visual, which is not exactly consonant with the setting of the story, but we'll just plow through, right?
Well, we can hear you, and you're coming through perfectly, so I think we'll be good.
Okay.
Why don't we take a few minutes before we stream the premiere just to ask Rand a couple of questions? Do you think, Jennifer?
Yeah, sounds wonderful.
Great.
I have some.
Yeah, me too. Got a pocket full. Let's start with Rand asking you to tell us a little bit about Munich 1919. Tell us about the story, and how did the prompt, which was in the audience, how did that inspire you?
Oops, looks like Rand is...
Oh, I think maybe he's frozen.
I think he's a little bit frozen. Poor Rand.
We'll see if he comes back here in a second.
Looks like he's trying.
So, it was fascinating to me, Jennifer, while we're waiting for him to join us again, 140 entries. I mean, I remember when we were just kind of conceiving this. I mean, that was remarkable.
Oh, I was floored. And I've run contests, writing contests before, and I have to say it's remarkable, especially for this being our first time out and kind of an unknown quantity. And yeah, I was really impressed, and impressed by the quality of the submissions we received as well.
Yeah, so a writing contest like this, is this something that the Mark Twain House does quite a lot of?
When we were more fully staffed, we did. And I imagine that we will again. We haven't for a little while, but we used to run a number of them. It looks like we have Rand back.
It do. Hi, Rand, are you back with us?
Yeah, I don't know what's going on. And as you know, any technical problem is well beyond my capacity. So I guess, look, we'll just go with as long as I can stay here. As long as the gremlins of the virtual world allow me to be present, I will be present. So let's just keep our fingers crossed. The story set in Munich in 1919. I had read a very excellent biography of Hitler called "Hitler: The Path to Power" by the late American novelist Charles Braceland Flood. And I read and was struck by a passage in the book when he describes Hitler attending several beer hall gatherings sponsored by a very ragtag group that later became the Nazi Party. This was in the fall of 1919 in Munich. That was a terrible time in Germany. The onerous conditions of the end of World War I, the treaties that Germany was forced to sign, rampant inflation, and extreme political violence across the country was making for a miserable situation. And I was struck by Charles Flood's account, and I'm speaking quickly because who knows how long I'm going to be able to be here. I was struck by Flood's account of the night of September 12th, 1919, when Hitler spoke in a place called the Sternecker Bräukeller, the Sternecker Beer Hall, and he denounced a fellow audience member. And he did it so vehemently that the man left like with his sort of tail tucked between his legs, like a wet poodle. That's what Hitler later boasted in Mein Kampf, like a wet poodle. Hitler actually had been sent to this evening to sort of spy on these proto-Nazis on behalf of the army. He'd been a corporal in World War I. But this ragtag group of Nazis were very impressed by Hitler's oratory, which was about the need for German power, and they soon drafted him as their chief demagogue. So after I read this passage in the book, I was just, as a fiction writer, fascinated by what it might have been like to be there in the Sternecker Bräukeller on the night when this anonymous person, who is not named in the story, made his first powerful oratory. Now, I chose as my protagonist the owner and barkeep of the beer hall, who's simply known as called S in the story, and he and his wife are very apolitical. They don't really care. They mistrust all politics. They consider it to be just talk. They have a saying: "Give me the speech, give me the talk that I can eat, and maybe I'll listen." All they care about is serving beer and sausage and potatoes and making some money. So the challenge for me was to present a series of events in the evening and an inner crisis for this protagonist that brings him from the point of skepticism and even cynicism about political talk to actually listening. So the story centers on a small setback. He's hoping to get. There was borderline famine in Germany at that time, and they're running short on potatoes. And as you'll see in the production later on, he has tried to get some potatoes from the black market, and the kid he has out searching for potatoes shows up, and he doesn't have potatoes, he has turnips.
Oh no.
And something just snaps in S, because he considers the idea of serving turnips in his restaurant to simply be beyond the pale. And as he experiences this crisis, this suddenly, this vehement, passionate speaker is speaking. So the prompt, just to answer the second part of your question, which had to do with an audience, being in an audience at an event, either planned or unplanned, and trying to decide, I think I have a quote, where the choice is to participate or observe. Just a perfect prompt for this story, because I wanted to suggest that I wanted to take an apolitical and essentially decent person, S, and put him as witness to this foundational moment, and then have pressures act on him in such a way that at the end of the story, he steps forward. And I wanted to suggest how the pressure of desperate political circumstances, desperate economic circumstances, political polarization and hatred, and the passionate oratory of a fanatic could open up a dangerous susceptibility. So that's the way the story, that's the theme of the story and the way it unrolls. And the
Oh, that's fascinating, huh?
Yeah, for sure.
So we're all looking forward to watching the premiere in just a few minutes. But before we do, Rand, can you quickly tell me what's it like to write historical fiction? This is clearly historical fiction, as you've just described. And have you done that before?
Yeah, and it was something that I hadn't done before. When you're writing non-historical fiction, the scenes have to work according to what's playing out, in your mind, and according to the rules that you've set up for how your narrative is going to function. Every writer at the beginning of a story or a novel creates a kind of set of de facto rules for how language is going to work, how narrative is going to work, and then working out the narrative is an attempt to follow those rules you've set for yourself. That is true in this scene. There's a psychology to S's experience of the evening. There's the relationship between him and his wife, the relationship between him and his nephew. So all those kind of standard elements, and the scene has to be set in a convincing and compelling way. But at the same time, then there's this whole other set of things you have to be responsible to. And so when you hear the story, which is so beautifully read by Mike Schilling, and interestingly, as we'll see, tricked out with sort of 1919-ish bar stuff. The characters who are mentioned, this ragtag band of proto-Nazis, Feder and Harrer, they were all real figures, and I had to learn about them. The things that they said, the things that they say in the story are taken from actual things they said in beer halls. I think Hitler's remarks on that night were not recorded, so I took, for what Hitler says, and again, he's unnamed, but I took bits and pieces of speeches of his and popped them in on that night. So you also have to think, am I offering an interpretation of what happened then, that has some merit? So there's kind of an extra set of responsibilities and in some ways limitations that you're, at least I was constantly aware of. It actually made the writing of it more interesting. As Robert Frost said, a blank verse was like playing tennis without a net. The net constitutes whatever rules there are. This was almost like playing tennis with two nets.
Oh, wow. Well, we have about just a couple of seconds before we go into showing the video and premiering this amazing piece. But it sounds like you have a command of the German language. So setting this in Germany, was there, beyond telling this specific story, what was it like to set it there? Did you have to do a bunch of research, or did you have
all fiction writers understand what kinds of characters they'd be comfortable writing and what kinds of characters they wouldn't be. And that depends on what sorts of implicit, latent, underlying background knowledge you need to have. I lived in Germany for 7 years. I speak German quite well, and I love the German language. Close readers of this story will see certain phrases in English that are kind of almost direct translation syntactically and grammatically from German. My friends know that I do a lot of German accents. Maybe get even a little bit tired of hearing how much German making fun of the Germans. And like most forms of mimicry, that really expresses love. I love the German language, and I wouldn't have been able to write this story if I hadn't lived there, for 7 years. I'm drinking my glass of Schlenkele Rauchbier. So there's a lot of lived German experience behind this story.
Terrific. Well, without further ado, let's go ahead, let's roll tape and see what you've created.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
This is WPTS. Welcome to the Story Hour. Tonight's story, Munich 1919, written by Rand Richards Cooper. Our program is sponsored by the Bushnell and the Mark Twain House and Museum.
It was well after 8 when the first speaker rose, and S., owner of the Sternecker Bräukeller, stood behind the bar. He surveyed the crowd, the usual grimy workers, the unemployed clerks masquerading as professors, but also, tonight, a few men in collars and cravats, men who really could be Professoren. Already, S. had sold 19 plates of sausage, and appetites showed no sign of flagging. If he ran short of fresh sausages, he could substitute smoked ones. People listening to orators, even such paltry orators as these, paid less attention to what was on their plates. He served another verse teller. Each plate meant another 50 pfennigs coming in, and S needed every last one. He owed the butcher money, and if the weather got cold, he would soon owe somebody for coal. During the war, one had accepted such shortages, but now the war had been over for a year, the government fallen, and the Kaiser fled, and things had scarcely improved. At the front of the room, the speaker addressed his audience in a wheedling voice on the evils of capitalism. S. thought, "Show me the lecture I can eat and drink, and I will happily step to the table." He idly scanned the audience and spotted the cross-eyed machinist, and near him, the captain who had had his nose shot off at Ypres, face like a bad dream. There were dozens of such groups afoot in Munich, from Spartacists and anarchists to Freikorps thugs. S. let them all come, as long as they paid and didn't wreck anything. Business was business, whatever the politics. Beer isn't black or red, he told his wife. Verse turns equally left and right. S stood at the bar, topping off a row of Pilsners. There were sounds he liked to listen for as he worked. The clanging bell of the streetcar outside in the Lindenstrasse. The clop of a horse's hoof. The birds that twittered at sunset in the tiny yard out back. The birds sang and sang, oblivious to whether things went well for humans or badly. S envied their heedlessness. Tonight he was listening also for the putt-putt of Joachim, the boy next door on his motorized bicycle. Joachim spent his mornings running newspapers all over town and the rest of the day organizing things. Earlier, S had sent him out to organize some potatoes. It was yet another evil that had come back from the war. The traffic in phantom supplies, the bribes and rumors, and the sudden unexplained absence or presence of things. But S needed potatoes. And so, all evening, he had been listening for the putt-putt in the yard. Back in the kitchen, his wife stood at the counter slicing radishes. Behind her, a coil of sausages sizzled in a pan on the stove. "So, who is saving the world this time?" she spoke without looking up. "I believe they call themselves the German Workers' Party." She glanced up, and he knew what she was thinking. There was surely less work represented in that entire room than the two of them together did in a day. "Has the boy come by?" "Haven't seen him." "Well, maybe he got his hands on something good out there. Maybe he's been organizing a little surprise for us." S showed his wife what he hoped was a cheerful smile. He watched her spear a sausage from the pan with a fork, shake it off onto a plate, and array alongside it radish slices, mustard, and finally a roll. "A Kaiserbrötchen," she said, handing it to him, "for the German worker." Emerging into the smoky room, he saw that Feder had given way to Herre. Herre wrote in the so-called nationalist papers, grimy broadsides that blamed Jews and Bolsheviks for everything. The man went about half-shaven, in a filthy suit coat, and he limped, a twisted club foot that sent him bobbing across the room like a rag tossed into the sea. The squinter, the limper, the captain without a face. Perhaps they should call themselves the German Cripples Party, S reflected. Circling, he collected a tray full of beer glasses and returned to the counter to wash them, as Herr launched into his talk, reading from a rumpled sheet of paper. "I should like to discuss the following theme," he began. "Who is responsible for the World War?" S concentrated on washing glasses. He knew too well the membership of the groups who spent their evenings in beer halls and restaurant cellars like his. Most were mere boys from the neighborhood, and pathetic boys at that. The ones who had bad skin and stuttered, or who hated their fathers but cowered before them, who were desperate for a uniform. Then there were the thugs, soldiers from the front, grown cruel on violence and living for revenge alone. And finally came the so-called leaders, failed professors who toddled with ideas like toys, waving their pamphlets and quaking with joy at the unexpected good fortune of having finally found an audience upon whom to spew out their visions of a new Germany. It was all just talk, empty phrases that brought nothing. The weakling, the professor, and the thug, they were about as likely to create that new Germany as a pig was to fly. He had no use for idle chatter. In times such as these, one had to work more, not less. A member of the audience stood up, a ridiculous figure in a greasy frock coat and drooping mustaches, who introduced himself as Professor Dr. Baumann. As he did, S heard through the back window the sputtering cough of Joachim's motorcycle. He removed his timepiece from his vest pocket. Nearly 10. A smile came to his face as he pictured the machine, its sidecar full with potatoes, and on top of that something extra, whatever it was that had been keeping Joachim out. the fruit of a night's digging through Munich. The boy was clever, S reminded himself. He knew when a thing was worthwhile. There remained the round of beer glasses to fill, and he did it at a leisurely pace, savoring the mystery prize awaiting him in the other room. Who knew what it might be? A wireless radio apparatus? An overcoat for his wife? Such thoughts were grandiose, he knew. But he allowed himself the pleasure nonetheless. S draped his dish towel over his forearm and went back through the swinging door into the kitchen. His wife stood at the wash basin, scrubbing a pan. In the corner, potatoes were piled like stones. The boy himself was nowhere to be seen. So, said S. No secret surprise from the black flea markets? His wife harumphed. Oh, well, he sighed. I confess it, I was dreaming of a radio hidden in those potatoes. Potatoes? She looked at him. Where do you see potatoes? Frowning, S proceeded to the pile by the door. Stone by stone, he lifted them, and every last one was wrong. They were too big, too round. The skin held a violet tint. He cut into one with his fingernail and looked at the pale meat. How lovely, he said, tossing it back. A heap of turnips. His wife shrugged. Perhaps can someone tell me what I am supposed to do with a heap of turnips? The usual. Cook them, peel them, eat them, serve them. He stared at her. But these are turnips. Who am I now, the turnip king of Munich? S felt his face swelling and reddening. He looked toward the back door. No wonder he ran out of here like a thief. His wife turned to him. He is a boy, she said. You told him to get something and he got something. You should thank him. He held up a hand to quiet her. Listen here. These are turnips. He managed in a throttled voice, then turned and pushed back through the swinging door and into the restaurant. Incredibly, the mustachioed professor was still droning on, to the rustling impatience of his audience. S started in again with washing glasses, trying to shut out the man's voice and get himself under control. But he was shaking, and as he stared down at his hands rooting about in the gray water, he thought of men sleeping on park benches and pawning their overcoats for food. Doctors everywhere who refused to see you unless you brought a brick of coal for the stove. He shuddered to think of himself, stupid with optimism, plodding along day after day, dumb as a cart horse. And now here stood this so-called professor, resembling nothing so much as a drunken coachman, promoting his grand solution. Bavaria should remove itself from the Reich and attach itself to Austria. Ha! S imagined hurling a beer stein at him, then another and another, till every last glass lay in bits. A commotion in the room interrupted his thoughts. A man in a worn, dark blue suit had risen and stood rebuking the professor in vehement tones. To leave Germany for Austria was senseless, he charged, a finger aimed in the professor's face. Anyone claiming otherwise was a fool or a traitor. We don't want a smaller Reich. That is the logic of the enemy. A German is a German wherever he is. And wherever he is, there is Germany. See here, Professor Baumann started. But the speaker in the blue suit pushed his objections aside like so much plowed earth. Jawohl, someone in the audience called out. Others chimed in until, amid a general buzz of scorn, the professor gathered up his hat and skulked out the door. The new speaker moved a few steps toward the front, allowing S a better look at him. His hair was neatly parted, face pink and soft-looking for a man clearly in his 30s, mustache clipped in a comical toothbrush style. S recalled him from earlier, asking politely for water instead of beer. Now he spoke, and as he did, a certain stiffness in his bearing seemed to melt away. Every day poses a new insult to Germany. Black African troops, bought by the French, consort openly with German women. As for the so-called Republic in Weimar, what can you expect from a government with a saddler's apprentice for a chancellor and a constitution written by a Jew? Ladies and gentlemen, these are deliberate provocations. These are insults to the greatness of Germany. The speaker hectored the audience, lofting his words in a curious manner, as if addressing not 36, but 3,000. There was something in the man's voice, a low rumble that rolled and trilled, rising, hanging on the high notes with a liquid, almost musical quality. S watched him gesture, raising a hand with fingers curled as if holding an invisible goblet. His hand was graceful, its fingers long and womanly. And the man himself seemed to look at it for a long instant with fascination. Then he crushed it into a fist. "Things cannot continue in this way," he shouted, glowering at his listeners. "To German misery there is one answer only: German will and German iron." The pale eyes shone with a raging sorrow, face flushing, and for a moment S thought the man would weep tears of pure conviction. Behind them, the kitchen door swung open, and out came his wife. "What in God's heaven is all this hullabaloo?" She looked over to the wild-eyed speaker, haranguing the crowd. "Who is this little puppet supposed to be?" S said nothing. He was distracted by a sensation of something moving outward from the man in the blue suit and into the assembled listeners, pouring into their glistening, upturned faces as from a pitcher into empty glasses. His wife turned to him. "And you? What will you eat when you have swallowed this silliness?" They were S's own words, thrown back in his face. "Show me the lecture I can eat and drink, and I will happily step to the table." But instead of answering, he put a finger to his lips to quiet her. And drying his hands on his dish towel, stepped from behind the counter.
Wow.
That was so powerful. Rand, how do you feel?
Well, I feel great. It's, when you write a story, it's something that's happening in your mind, and to see it actually taken and created in this way, it's pretty great.
Oh,
Yeah. So
Stephanie,
great.
I'd like to watch it again. How can I do that?
Well, everyone can watch it again, and we hope they will. They can find it by visiting bushnell.org/page to stage. You can see it there in the bottom third. You can also read the original short story there, which I hope folks will go ahead and do as well. Just fantastic, Rand. Such great work, and great work to the team that put the video together, that put the project together. I want to do a special call out to folks on the Bushnell team as well. Ryan Glista, who was our cinematographer, Sarah Stevenson, who saw this project from its initial, very granular beginnings, and Mike Schilling, of course, and our Foley artist has just gone straight out of my head. Tate Burmeister, I think.
Burmeister, yep.
Yes, just incredible. So a special thank you to all of those folks. And Jennifer, to you and the folks at the Mark Twain House and Museum. What a wonderful partnership this has been.
It has been for us as well. It's been very rewarding, and thank you for reaching out to us with the idea in the very first place. We're going to do it again, right?
I hope so. Yes,
So too.
we are in the beginning stages of imagining what another round of Page to Stage looks like.
Oh, so to be involved. Rand, I can hardly think of a better inaugural winner than you in Munich 1919.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
I certainly love the fact that by just a quirk of casting, Mike Schilling, I believe, is the grandchild of Germans or Austrians. And I think he's like a microbrewery guy.
He does. He and his wife own a business in Northampton called Beerology. So he was well suited.
Honestly, I love that. I really do. And you know, the production was very interesting to me, and I appreciate it a lot.
Well, thank you again. Thanks, everyone. And again, to rewatch or to read the short story, visit us, bushnell.org/page to stage. Thanks so much, everyone. And thanks for joining us. Have a great
Thank you.
night.
Good night, everybody. Congratulations, Rand.
Thanks. Good night.